Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
What's going on, Mets fans? And I'm going to warn you right from the start. This video is going to hurt. If you're already emotional about losing Pete Alonso, if you're already frustrated with how this entire situation was handled, what I'm about to show you is going to break your heart all over again. Because we need to talk about what Pete Alonso actually said in his goodbye to Mets fans, the emotion behind his words, and why everything he said proves that David Stearns made one of the biggest mistakes in franchise history. Smash that like button if you're still not over Pete leaving, and stick around, because when you hear exactly what he said and understand what he really meant, you're going to realize just how badly this front office fumbled what should have been a slam dunk decision. When Pete Alonso officially signed with the Baltimore Orioles, he had to face the media. He had to explain to the world why he was leaving the only organization he'd ever known. He had to say goodbye to the fans who had embraced him, who had chanted his name, who had made him feel like a hero every single time he stepped to the plate at Citi Field. And if you actually listen to what Pete said, if you pay attention to the words he chose and the emotion in his voice, you can tell this wasn't some routine player departure. This was a guy who was genuinely heartbroken about leaving New York. Pete started his press conference by thanking the Mets organization. Standard stuff, right? That's what every player does when they leave. But then he said something that really stood out to me. He said that playing for the Mets was a dream come true. He talked about being drafted by them, coming up through their system, making his debut at Citi Field. He said wearing a Mets uniform meant everything to him, and you could hear it in his voice. This wasn't just diplomatic language. This was genuine emotion from a guy who actually cared about being a Met. Then Pete said the thing that should haunt David Stearns for the rest of his career. He said he always hoped he would finish his career with the Mets. He said that was his dream, to be one of those rare players who spends their entire career with one organization, to retire as a Met, to have his number retired at Citi Field one day. That was what Pete wanted. That was his vision for his future. Let that sink in for a second. Pete Alonso is sitting there in an Orioles uniform, telling the world that his dream was to spend his entire career in New York. Not that he's excited for a fresh start, not that he's ready for a new chapter. He's saying his dream got crushed because the Mets didn't want him back. How is that not absolutely devastating to hear as a Mets fan? And you know what makes it even worse? Pete didn't have to say that. He could have just given generic answers about being grateful for his time in New York and looking forward to the future in Baltimore. He could have protected himself emotionally and played it safe, but he didn't. He opened up. He let everyone see how much it hurt to leave, because that's who Pete Alonso is. He's authentic. He's genuine. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and the Mets just let that guy walk away. Pete also talked specifically about Mets fans, and this part really got to me. He said that Mets fans are the best in baseball. He talked about the energy at Citi Field, about hearing the crowd chant his name, about feeling their passion and support through both the good times and the bad times. He said that connection with the fan base was something he'll never forget and will miss every single day. And then he did something that really shows you what kind of person he is. He apologized. Pete Alonso apologized to Mets fans for not being able to bring them a championship. He took responsibility for something that wasn't his fault. He played his heart out every single game. He gave everything he had. The failures of this organization over the last 6 years are not on Pete Alonso, but he still felt the need to say sorry because he cared that much about the fans and about winning for them. Think about that for a second. This is a player who just got completely disrespected by the front office. They didn't even make him a contract offer. They ghosted him throughout free agency. They made it clear they didn't value him enough to fight to keep him. And his response is to apologize to the fans for not winning them a championship. That's the kind of character and class that David Stearns completely failed to appreciate. Pete also addressed how the departure happened, and this is where you can really read between the lines. He talked about how he kept waiting for the Mets to reach out. He said he and his agent were ready to have conversations, ready to negotiate, ready to work something out, but the call never came. The Mets just went silent. And eventually, Pete had to accept the reality that they didn't want him back and start seriously considering other options. Now, Pete is too classy to trash the organization publicly. He's not going to go on a rant about David Stearns. He's not going to burn bridges or air grievances. That's not who he is. But if you listen to what he's saying, the hurt is there. When he talks about waiting for a call that never came, that's him saying he felt abandoned. When he talks about his dream of finishing his career as a Met, that's him saying the organization took that dream away from him. The criticism is there. It's just wrapped in the kind of grace and professionalism that Pete always shows. Pete also made a point of talking about his teammates. He mentioned specific guys by name. He talked about the relationships he built in the clubhouse. He talked about the bonds that were formed over 6 years of grinding together, winning together, losing together. And you could tell those relationships mattered to him. Walking away from those guys, from that brotherhood, that hurt him too. And you know what he didn't mention? David Stearns. He didn't mention the front office. He thanked the fans, the teammates, the coaches, the support staff. But when it came to the people who actually made the decision to let him walk, Pete had nothing to say. And that silence speaks volumes. It tells you everything you need to know about the relationship, or lack thereof, between Pete and the front office. Here's what really kills me about Pete's goodbye. You can tell he didn't want to leave. Every word, every sentiment, every emotion, it all points to a guy who loved being a Met and would have stayed if given the opportunity. This wasn't a player looking for a fresh start. This wasn't a player who had outgrown the organization or wanted to move on to something new. This was a player who got pushed out by a front office that didn't value him. The Orioles didn't have to sell Pete on anything. They didn't have to convince him that Baltimore was better than New York. They just had to show him basic respect, make him a fair offer, and tell him they wanted him. That's it. That's all it took to sign Pete Alonso. Meanwhile, the Mets couldn't even be bothered to pick up the phone. Pete also talked about the future, about his excitement to join a young Orioles team that's building something special. He talked about their talented core and their championship window and how he wants to help bring a title to Baltimore. And every single word of that should sting for Mets fans, because that's what Pete should be saying about the Mets. He should be talking about helping New York win a championship. He should be talking about being part of the Mets' next great team. But he can't, because David Stearns decided Pete wasn't worth keeping. What really stands out to me about Pete's entire goodbye is the maturity and grace he showed. He could have been bitter. He could have been angry. He had every right to call out the Mets for how they handled this. But instead, he took the high road. He thanked everyone who deserved to be thanked. He expressed nothing but love and appreciation for his time in New York. He showed more class in his goodbye than the Mets organization showed him throughout the entire process. And that's the thing about Pete Alonso that David Stearns completely failed to understand. Pete isn't just a power hitter who mashes home runs. He's a genuinely good person who represents your organization with dignity and professionalism. He handles adversity with grace. He treats people with respect. He does everything right both on and off the field. Those qualities matter. They have real value. And the Mets just let all of that walk to Baltimore because they were too focused on analytics and contract projections to recognize what they were losing. I also want to point out something Pete said about Baltimore specifically. He talked about how the Orioles made him feel wanted from day one, how they pursued him aggressively, how they communicated clearly about their vision for him, how they made the entire process feel professional and respectful. And again, those comments aren't random. Pete is telling everyone exactly what the Mets failed to do. He's highlighting all the ways Baltimore succeeded where New York failed. So here's what Pete Alonso's emotional goodbye tells us. It tells us he loved being a Met more than the Mets loved having him. It tells us he would have stayed if they had given him any reason to. It tells us the front office pushed away a player who desperately wanted to be part of this organization's future. And it tells us that David Stearns made a catastrophic mistake that can't be undone. Every time Pete hits a home run for Baltimore, every time he's on national television succeeding in an Orioles uniform, every time he helps them win games and make playoff runs, Mets fans are going to remember his goodbye. They're going to remember that he wanted to stay and the organization pushed him away. They're going to remember the hurt in his voice when he talked about his dream of finishing his career as a Met, they're going to remember that this didn't have to happen. And years from now, when people look back at David Stern's tenure with the Mets, letting Pete Alonso walk is going to be remembered as one of his defining failures, not just because of the production the Mets lost, but because of how it happened, because of the disrespect, because of the lack of communication, because of everything that Pete's emotional goodbye revealed about how badly this situation was mishandled. So here's what I want from you in the comments. Did Pete's goodbye make you emotional? Did it change how you feel about this whole situation? Do you think we're going to regret losing him even more than we already do? Because I'm telling you right now, watching Pete Alonso say goodbye to New York, hearing the pain in his voice, seeing how much being a Met meant to him, that's something this fan base is never going to forget or forgive. Hit that subscribe button for more Mets content that doesn't sugarcoat what's happening with this organization. Drop your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next video where we continue holding David Stearns and this front office accountable for the decisions that are destroying what could have been something special.